Hello everyone, here's today's interesting tidbit. So what we have here is a Elmo branded Super-8 sound 600 SD. So this is a Super-8 video camera. So it shoots 8mm video. It's got a zoom, then this is focus. And over here you can see it's got a place for like the film cassette. It looks like 8mm. It took like a film preloaded into a cassette. So like a lot of things, this one has an interesting story behind it. So myself and a couple of my friends were actually up at one of our local shooting ranges, plinking around. And like a lot of free ranges, it's kind of just piles of rubbish which other people drag up there, shoot at till it's in bits, and then just leave it there. And we found this camera just laying out in the middle of nowhere, just largely intact. As you can see, it's got a little bit of damage. Somebody must have shot it with something, but since it didn't do very much damage and it didn't penetrate very far, I would guess it's like a 22. When we picked it up, I assume this is the take video trigger thing, and when I picked it up, this was depressed, and then I pulled it out and it kind of popped up, and then I have not been able to depress it subsequently. Which actually, now that I look at it, looks like, I think it might just be because some of the metal's slightly bent. So I suspect if I go like this, yeah. So it looks like it just got a little bent. So presumably that's the take video button. So this is interesting because one of the big downsides of 8mm video is that it didn't have an audio track. Because again, it's just straight out film. And also it was, I believe in like the 40s or so. It was common in the 40s because I know there are World War II videos shot on Super-8. And there wasn't really portable technology for audio recording. So this somehow supports sound by virtue of the fact that in this Elmo Super-8 Sound 600 SD. So as you can see, it's got like mic, auxiliary earphones, RAM, I'm not sure what that is. It's also got ALC, which I would assume is automatic level control, and then, volume and money. It's got an automatic zoom function, which engages a motor. So this is fairly free, and now it's much more tight. And if you look over here, you can see it's got, wide and tele. It has this really interesting battery, which looks like it takes 6 AA's internally. I haven't actually been in here. It rattled a little bit. Oh, the reason it rattled is because some of the contacts apparently fell out. Yep. So, I think this looks to be a little bit beyond hope. One of the things I would like to do, though, is to try and apply a little bit of power. So one of the nice things is, from looking at this, we have 6 AA's, which is 9 volts. 1.5 times 6 is 9. And I think, well, unfortunately these aren't very easy to clip on. Well, I'm going to go try and find some batteries. 1 second. Here are some fresh Fry's brand AA's. We'll see if the camera will do anything interesting if we apply power. It's got nice logos telling you which way to position things. Goes like that. Finally, this goes on like this. 2 little screws hold it in. It's a rather cute battery mechanism. Just out of curiosity to make sure everything's working. Oops. 9.88 volts, exactly what we'd expect from 6 very new AA's. So let's install the battery. A lock run switch, and it doesn't seem to do anything. Oh, wait. So the zoom works, partially. The buttons are all cranky. And you can actually, if you look through the optical viewfinder, you can see the target. I don't know if you can make that out. So the optical viewfinder does work. And it has a little meter in the signal path, or in the visual path, for seeing the, for metering. It has a meter, an electronic meter. Let's see if I can figure out. Oh, that's interesting. So right here, there's a little push tab, and that engages what I would assume is the film advance mechanism. But it doesn't actually activate. It does not activate any of the electronics. So there are many little push tabbies. It's got a battery check, which seems to check out okay. 40mm phone jack, and then it's got an accessory clip up top with a triangular keyring on it. Diopter adjustment, I would assume. So it doesn't seem like it wants to run, even though it may need a film cassette that interfaces somehow. It's rather dusty because it was outside in a very dusty area. Not sure what this knob does. It's it had some pleather on here that was totally unlabeled that I peeled off just because it was really rather disgusting. So given that it doesn't seem to do anything, I think I'm going to just take it apart. Had no further luck trying to get it to actually move. One interesting thing is it's got a little dial back here that appears to indicate remaining like a film, good 200 milliseconds or 200 seconds down in increments of 20 to 0 seconds. So I think it has some sort of mechanism for tracking or measuring how long you've been recording. And then I would assume that the film cartridges that were available for this, from the fact that there's one that's 50 seconds and one that's 200, maybe came in 50 and 200 second varieties. Anyways, just going to start pulling things off. There's the door. I'm not going to put this back together either because it's kind of trashed. It's only been shot. One of the things that's kind of interesting is if you disengage the clutch that zooms it, it's still the zoom motor still works. It just doesn't activate anything. It appears that those 4 screws are all that hold on this side cover. See if there's anything interesting under here. Also, there we can see. Then there's the electric motor that drives the zoom mechanism. And then if I toggle the automatic manual, it moves this gear. It disengages and engages it up to that motor up top there. So there is the motor. So again, if I install that, and if I disengage the clutch, so the motor's in here somewhere. And you can see how it uses this big arc segment gear and his arc segment gear right here. And it's actually, it looks like it's got a slip clutch in there because you can still adjust it, which is quite nice. So in here we can see there's a contact right there on that pin. So if I hold that in, it doesn't do anything. can hear a relay kicking in and kicking out. So maybe the motor is just defective or jammed. But this doesn't appear, pushing this to close those contacts doesn't appear to have any effect. I wonder if there's another film presence sensor down in here somewhere. I suspect there's a recording head in here. I suspect the tape this took was basically just a straight, 8mm tape, possibly with a like a magnetic stripe on it, and then it recorded onto the magnetic stripe. Anyways, not much luck there. Let's see if I can take the cover off this side. I assume there is something under this rather disgusting pleather. There was on the other side. Yep. So this is kind of an interesting knob. So this is manual and automatic, and it latches in automatic, and then manual's over here, and you have to actually pull it and rotate it quite a ways. I'm not sure what that did. I mean, it switched between manual and automatic, but I'm not sure what was automatic in this context, because I haven't seen any way of setting anything like exposure or anything along those lines. So it did something automatically, but I don't know what. Let's move, continuing on. Hey. These are all rather stuck with age. That's kind of loose. I don't see any additional retainers unless they're under this. Okay, so this is floating. Wouldn't surprise me if there was something under here. Let's just see how far this will lift up. That wraps around the top. I think I need to take the top off first. It's interesting, this is Elmo branded, made in Japan, but it's a rather, I wonder if they had copyright issues, what with Sesame Street. I would assume that that's a recording line. Actually, now that I think about it, I wonder if I go like that, and it doesn't make any difference. That light doesn't seem to toggle no matter what I press down in the actual enclosure, which makes me think I'm not engaging the recording mechanism properly, even though I can hear that relay kicking in. Either that or the LED's just gone shot. Considering the vintage of this Super-8, I wonder when this was. I mean, it must be 70s or earlier. I think by 80s you were mostly VHS, or When did Super-8 go out of favor? I'll have to look it up. I don't know off the top of my head. So there's something else retaining this. I think maybe this top segment comes off. It only has screw holes. See if my video camera overheats again. It's the downside of shooting this sort of stuff with like an SLR camera. Ridiculously huge sensors, not designed for video, and then they overheat and kind of have nervous breakdowns at the drop of a hat. So there's the front. Is loose. And I would guess there's screws under this further pleather. What is it with like 70s equipment from Japan and pleather? I mean, does anyone think pleather is an attractive mechanism for finishing equipment? I mean, it just gets disgusting in a relatively short period of time, and it doesn't really look like leather. I'd rather have nicely machined metal or even just plastic with a nice surface finish on it. I mean, at least then, a year in, it's not, you know, some disgusting gooey residue redolent of fake dead animals. So there's an accessory mount of some sort. Cold shoe, I suppose, even though it's not like a traditional shoe. So we lift the top off and we have a circuit board. And little tiny leads going to this LED, which I would hope I can just push out. Held in with just glue. That's rather interesting. Look there, there's a little section of circuit board with just two pads on it, glued down to the some of the internal structure. Looking in here, this does look rather dated. It's got the slightly flexible yellow adhesive. Well, tore the other off, never mind. What we can also see now is more screws that hold the side panel on. So we are making progress. One, two, and three, I think. And there we go. Oh my, look at that. So here is presumably, this is the flywheel for the big, and some damage. This is the flywheel for the film advance. So one of the things you need in this sort of thing is you need a really a consistent velocity flywheel. You know, a consistent velocity for the film advance, you know, so that you don't have flutter in your frame rate. So they often, you know, you'll see these in cassette tapes too, but in this case, it's, you know, in a video camera, and you have a very large, you know, rotating mass driven by a very flexible belt from a little motor. And they take a while to get up to speed, but then once they're up at speed, the speed is pretty, at least over the short term, the speed is very predictable. So you can also see there's more damage in here. Looks like there's a little transistor. This is a BA707. I'm not sure how this was actually held down, but it looks like some of the, like the solder. I'm not sure. This is a very circuit board. It looks like it's copper traces, like just sitting. I mean, it's just bare copper with solder mask on sections, and the solder mask looks a lot like tape. You know, and then here's a little potentiometer just floating around. And I mean, I think I'm starting to see why it doesn't work. Here's that manual automatic adjustment. So again, if I install the battery over here, hold that down. There it is. You can't see the relay or anything moving yet. Here you can see the motor, the focus motor. So then if I flip the engaged switch, you can also see how apparently they were so cheap they didn't bother with like normal micro switches. It's a they've got like shaped metal. One second, let me take this screw out. So there are the buttons. So one is this, and the other is that. So rather than deal with actual, you know, it's just an interesting way of making buttons using shaped copper. I mean, at least it's all gold plated from the look of it. Looks like this has been disengaged again. So there's your nice controlled zoom and, you know, zoom, and then you have, here's the focus, which you can see moves the front element in and out. So looking around, you can see there's this really interesting switch right here. Lots and lots of fingers slide between one segment and another when you pull the trigger. And then it also engages a bunch of mechanical jazz if you hold this little tab right here down, which I would assume is a cassette presence detect. So looking over here, you can see here is the path for the optical viewfinder. There's some very nasty ancient Captain tape on it. Yeah. You have your electronics. You have this board, which is definitely damaged. You can actually, the belt's got some kinks in it, and it's also extremely old. The rubber has lost most of its elasticity due to age. So there's some adjustments here. This was accessible through the side of the case. Presumably diopter adjustment, and then this actually rotates, though I'm not sure why. But you can see it appears it comes apart. And I get an extremely small Phillips, or excuse me, slotted. Looks like I already have it out actually. Let's see if I can get this. Take that little tiny screw in there out. So there is the eyepiece, and that is just straight through. I wonder if you can install filters in there or something. And it looks like, oh, I think I know what happens. I think this had a rubber ocular on it, because it looks like there's a groove around here. So I think it had like a rubber eye cup that has subsequently fallen out and or been torn out. So the reason it could rotate is so that it could be left or right-handed. So then this is diopter, and you can actually see this whole thing has some flex to it. It's only tied down at one end. Here's the disengage switch for the electrical zoom. Interesting stuff going on here. Here's a little solenoid. Here's this transistor. Sorry about that, friend interrupt. So anyways, so somewhere in here there should be the shutter apparatus, and I'm not sure how the shutter works in this. I know in a lot of you know, slightly more expensive video cameras, they actually have like a half circle that's mirrored, and it rotates into the optical path, so half of the time it's reflecting basically the view out the lens out the viewfinder, and the other half it's exposing it to the film. And actually there's like a motorized segment on there that actually closes down the gap of the segment that's exposing the film to basically reduce the shutter time. But you know, basically the best shutter time you can do is half of 1/30th of a second, assuming you're shooting at 30 frames per second, or 1/60th of a second. They can actually take longer exposures just due to the constraints in the mechanism. Excuse me. So I'm not sure how the shutter in this works. They may use a partially silvered mirror or something along those lines. One thing you can do is you can see that that's a mirror. So presumably I'm going to take that mirror off, and we'll be able to see down into the optical assembly. Hopefully not lose the screws into the mechanism in the process of doing so. Oh hello. So this is actually, not only is this a mirror, but it's mounted on screws so it can be trimmed, which is a very common practice in a lot of optical systems. And maybe it's not. So here we have a little front surface mirror, and if you look down in there, you should be able to see stuff going on. Hey, you can see my fingers very light, barely. So looking down there, oh wait, so there were screws, or excuse me, springs. So here are some of the springs that were on. So it actually looks like it only had two. These two had springs on them and this corner didn't, and then the idea was that, you know, you can adjust it up and down, and it just has one fixed point and two adjustable points, which gives you, it doesn't give you in and out, but it does give you all the other degrees of rotation. So I wonder if this whole viewfinder will detach if I take some of these screws out. Oops, it's in there rather snugly. So this is, it appears it will, and it also looks like some of the display mechanisms for the viewfinder are right in here. So this is really, I mean, I've taken apart some other electronics from like the 70s and the 80s. I think it was 70s. I mean, I'm not sure. I can't date most of the stuff very precisely. But this is, the construction style in here is very redolent of, like, I think the 70s-ish era. Just the, you know, the point-to-point wiring, resistors up on end, all the little gray, electrolytics. It's very much a redolent of, I think, presumably the 70s, I would guess, though. I'm kind of guessing a little bit. Again, I just have kind of like, a lot of the stuff I've acquired used, you know, with no info on provenance whatsoever. Looks like my wire cutters are a little bent. So there's the meter, or the lens, and it's got something that looks a lot like a split prism in there. I'm not sure how that works focusing wise. And then down there, 1.8, 4, 5, 8, 11, 16, 22. I think there's a little meter in there somewhere, like a panel meter, and there's a little needle that swipes across those based on your exposure. I'm not totally certain. Let me take the bottom of this. I think this is presumably a meter. Oops. Oh, that's interesting. So it looks like it has little status indicators. Let's see where they poke in. Okay, so if you look down into the viewfinder, so you can, if you kind of see in there, it's got a little hole there and a little hole there. And one of the things you notice is that if I put this in here, that hole disappears. So I think these two lit up in segments of the viewfinder. So then here you can see it looks like this whole segment is allowed to rotate. I wonder if that's some sort of focusing. So glued down, and then we have this little tiny slotted screw here. So this whole segment does in fact rotate. I'm not sure why. This might just be for leveling, because I don't think this would have anything to do with focusing. You can see how it's got a helicoid in there, I believe. So it actually looks like there's two elements that move counter. Oh wait, no, so the whole knob, yeah, there's only one moving element, and then this knob can slide back and forth. Oh, because again, it's just rotating that screw. So this is just a free segment, and then that screw just moves up and down. That's rather interesting. Let me see if I can take this screw out here, and we may be able to see into the overlay. There's a rather intriguing screw. Look at that, it's like a brass cylinder with a little bit of threads on the end, so that's intended to be a mechanical stop. So this whole mechanism is glued together. It's threaded, as you can maybe be able to make out the threads. There it goes. So there it goes. So you can see how there's threads, and then they glue the threads. So I may have to be a little destructive here. What I think I can do is if I just bend this up a little bit. You can kind of see in there's some optical elements. And this whole, oh, that's amusing. It looks like it skips the screw if I'm not careful. Oh. So what's the easiest way to get this thing apart, considering they've glued the threads? There's the back end of the assembly, just a little lens in there. Looks like that's the screw that probably retains this back segment. Let's see. Little set screw. Appears to be the only one. Bingo. So there's this rear lens element. Little lenses. Then you can actually, oh look, you can see the mask in there now. So there's just a little segment of optical glass and I can read all the legends on it. Bah. It's rather greasy. Let me try taking this apart from the other end. Alright. So there's the, you can see the helicoid. Kind of a very specially shaped, presumably to make it so that the focusing seems linear. Despite the fact that there's probably a bunch of interesting interacting like logarithmic functions going on in there. So there's the front lens element, and that appears to basically be it. No wait, there's one more lens in there, but if you look down in there, oops, you can see the optical, the screen that has little numbers on it, you know. Okay, moving on. Trying to sweep all of this rubbish aside. Great, it's leaking screws. So here we can see down in here, I think there's a PNP device because it's green if I remember correctly. Large can TO 92, and there's a very intriguing like modified TO 92 package. Interesting packaging. So let me just start kind of just whacking away. See if I can get this top board free. You can see here's all these little mono audio jacks. I'm pretty convinced that it's largely irreparable at this point, just by virtue of the fact that I mean it's already got circuit board damage, you know, so I don't think I would have been able to get the system running. I may try and power the motor up. Well, there's a really interesting little section there. Look at that. That is a magnetic encoder. I would assume that's probably the shutter. So, looking in there, I don't see anything shifting, so I'm not too sure. Anyways, the optical path is rather contrived because it either comes in and goes up and over or comes in and goes down and over. No wait, it is just straight, never mind, my bad. So the optical path from here is just straight through into the cassette, you know, cabin, I will call it. Let's continue de-screwing. Cut the strap loop off just because the strap was kind of in the way and rather extremely disgusting, to be honest. So down in here we can see we have more Phillips. At least I didn't use Torx, but then I think this might predate Torx. It's just right on the edge of what I can actually take out. So these are apparently integral to holding the thing all together. Now it appears it's loose. So, looks like that is part of the casing. So I will have to remove these funky little strap loops. And then it just lifts off with two rather skinny wires for battery and an external DC in. Look at that, that's like such small wires. All of the system power runs through those two little flimsy wires. And it looks like they run right up into this transistor that was bad. Been torn off the board, so there's no surprise it didn't work. Some interesting, like, film vapor deposition on there. Lots of interesting little mechanisms in here. Oh, hey, look. So that little arm in there is the needle, the indicator needle, and that's driven by all of this stuff here. So there's this really intricate mechanical assembly, several linkages here. It goes down into even more stuff down in the image path. So that's what adjusts. So when the exposure changes, it moves that needle, which we may be able to see. Yeah, see, there's the little exposure indicator vane. I'm not sure what this little red tab is for. So it appears it's mounted on something, so it looks like maybe if you put a certain film in, it retracts, so it doesn't. I think it's showing that you shouldn't be in this area when the needle points over there. So my guess is that this is like a little electromechanical indicator that pops into the viewfinder and is like, don't use this segment of it, because that's definitely driven by some little tiny. There's a solenoid down here somewhere, I would imagine, that moves that. Lots of intricate little electromechanical assemblies. Just look at all the delicate balancing that must have gone on in there. Anyways, moving on. So these three screws hold on the zoom motor. Just then flip it off. Looks like I've already. Oh no, wait, this is just. I'm not entirely certain what this is. It's just like a stop. And it also has the little contacts for that LED, which is no longer there. But I can see that these wires run down right to there. Just cut that, and then it's free. This is like extremely heavy. This is solid metal. Not sure what it is. It looks like it's been vacuum coated just by the coloration, or maybe that's some sort of plating. So there's the motor in charge of focusing, and you can actually see it's got interesting little, I wonder if those are little, I think they're ferrite beads in series of each lead. I guess they had noise issues. So let's see. So this is presumably a little ground of some sort. Maybe I should start taking, yeah, I'm going to start taking the screws in the film cabin out. I bet this comes out next. Let's see, is there those screws over there? Screws down in there. So we have some less. Just kind of seeing my hands, I apologize. So I've actually never used a Super-8 video camera. I've seen them, and I have a peripheral interest in their lenses, which is actually one of the things I'm hoping to salvage from this, just because I'm interested in photography. Of course, now that I've thrown this apart, somebody's probably going to go online and say, it was worth a whole lot of money. And then I will be sad. So here you can see more. So that moves that. And it looks like this shaft is... Oh wow, look at that. So there is a worm gear right here, and that rotates this shaft, which then... Oh, I see. So this rotating is what cranks the film counter around, and then when this gets pushed in, it resets it. So that's the reset on the film timer. That's a rather intricate little mechanism. What rotates this though? Oh, so this must be closely tied to the film feed. Anyways, more screws. Hey. 20% battery life left on the video camera. This is interesting. Look at this switch. So it switches between different segments on some of the tabs, but on this section, it doesn't change anything. Because these two are connected, these two are connected, and these two are connected. So it looks like it has like a partially engaged and fully engaged option. I'm not sure what the point of this is, considering these two tabs seem to be permanently connected. All sorts of grit and nasty grunge in here. Take the hinge off. Very stuck. So you can see there's the film gauge for the 8mm film, so I presume that's the projected image is actually the size of that rectangle. Let's see if it'll focus. So that's the where the actual film would run, and it looks like right here we have the alignment pin, which would presumably retract and poke out to grab the film for each frame, make it properly aligned. So one thing that's of interest is this hole. That's metal. So I think that this cabin is actually part of the frame of the entire camera. Which means I think taking it apart from this side is probably somewhat pointless. Do that. And yeah, it looks like so it looks like this did in fact use tape that had a magnetic track on. It used standard Super-8 video, film, but it had there was like a magnetic track on it. You can also see there's other stuff. Here's another button in here. More interesting mechanical doodads. Move something within the lens assembly. You can also see down in there, you can see some of the various, the helicoids or whatever they are for focusing it. I'm pretty sure helicoid is the proper term. So that's for moving the various elements in various patterns depending on how far zoomed in you want. Up here we just have all discretes, which is except for this one. There's one big SIP device. Again, it's very Japanese. I think I'm going to have to take the electronics out. So here we have a little cover plate that held on the accessory shoe. Underneath that are two big caps and some screws. See, there's a jack on the back. See, do I see any? There's one more screw right there. They like to use screws in arrangements of 3, which is kind of intriguing. It's like triangular. And I guess 3 points of support is all you really need for most things. I mean, that'll constrain you in all 6 axes of movement. But it's kind of intriguing since you normally see 4 screws, at least in modern equipment. It's either just a design preference of the guy who engineered it or something different. Here you can see it's beautiful. That is a hand-taped circuit board right there. We still haven't replicated the beauty of old tape boards. And we can replicate the function, but the form is just... tape is just beautiful. I think I'm going to have to start moving some of the other segments here. See if I can't get the flywheel out. The full-size Phillips. Feels like these have a lot of thread lock on them. There it goes. There's one. There's the other. Excellent. That screw had kind of started stripping. So there's the capstan. You can see it looks like that's where the film ran on it. It's got a little groove engraved into it. There's a big brass, probably oil impregnated bearing. And then you can actually, if you look over here, so that's where the capstan poked through, and then if I push down here and squeeze, you can see how here's the pinch roller. Oops. So there's the pinch roller that holds the film against the capstan. And then the capstan would rotate and you can see the pinch roller, and then that would advance the film. It looks like they had a segment in the middle to try and prevent to prevent it from squeezing the actual segment of the film that's, is photosensitive. Interesting. You don't see that on normal cassette decks. Oh, yeah. 1 second, let me change batteries. So, continuing on, we've got this interesting, very early flex circuit board. Interesting, you can see there it's Elmo branded. I wonder which came first, this or Sesame Street. So there's the motor. Tokyo Micro motor. Interesting. So here, this looks kind of like an interesting variable capacitor of some sort. So that's what was adjusted by the manual automatic adjuster. Go back to a much smaller Phillips. It may be some sort of interesting rotary switch, I'm not sure. A lot of unique looking bits in here. What if this whole section is glued down? Think about it. So this appears to actually be threaded. So that actually holds this on. So there we go, it's becoming a little more free now. So this is in fact, it's a rotary potentiometer with a switch on it. So there's the switch. See, so you can see how the switch opens and closes. And then underneath that is just a plain old-fashioned, probably conductive plastic rotary potentiometer. See the wipers in there, you can kind of see it a little bit. Let's try, it's a carbon comp, I'd almost imagine. I'd have to use conductive plastic, excuse me. Not too sure what I was thinking. And this whole board appears to be sticky taped down. So this whole board appears to be held down with basically adhesive. I'm just going to chopping away. That's interesting. There's actually a little knot in some of these to take up the slack. So I've actually, early Super 8 video cameras I've seen are actually wind up. So, I mean, that's kind of the opposite end of the technology curve from this. That you have one end of purely mechanical ones that don't have any electronics, and at the other end you have this, which is basically entirely electronic. Actually, now that I think about it, I think if I take these 4 screws out, most of the lens will come off. Probably going to try and mount this lens on my SLR and see what I can get out of it. Because it's, you know, kind of, I don't know, if you're into the whole lo-fi cheek. It's kind of tacky most of the time, but I don't know, I think there's something neat about looking at, you know, the outputs of genuine old-ass technology. So here we can see, apparently it looks like it has a variable aperture. So have a look at that, and this whole thing is driven by a moving coil meter. So this whole thing is insanely delicate. I mean, it's all just like I could probably blow it apart with just by exhaling on it. So you can also see it's got presumably a color balance filter that pops in and pops out, and it's all little sliding assemblies. But I'm just amazed by this whole so just the fact that you have a moving coil meter, you know, basically a little panel meter element, and that's what drives the aperture. It's just so delicate. And then here's, you know, that little snap in, snap out. I think this was actually, yeah. So this is actually pressed by one of the tabs in the film casing. Maybe it was like a film information thing, like how ISO is stamped on film, you know, some modern film canisters, you know, with electrically enhanced contacts. So it looks like there's a tab that disengages this orange filter, which presumably is like an indoor-outdoor filter of some sort. So here you can see this interesting little a motor with a magnet on it, and yes, that if you look down here, there's the shutter. So presumably the shutter speed on this was completely fixed, because I'm not seeing any easy way for them to adjust that. So the shutter was fixed, and then they varied the aperture to get the proper exposure. And that's just so insanely delicate. It's also amazing. Look at the shapes. It must intermesh in such a way that it probably tries to create, you know, a decent looking bokeh. Though considering the tiny film size, you know, 8mm, I doubt, I mean, it's probably just about everything was in focus all the time. So it also one of the things we can see is that it does in fact look like the optical path uses a partially silvered mirror. So it does in fact use a partially silvered mirror, which is right there to split the viewfinder off from the actual main lens element. So here we can kind of see how the telephoto mechanism works. Also appears there's a little bit of plastic poking in right in that corner. I wonder if something's kind of sunk a little bit. So here's the little segment, that's the dial, the meter, kind of the little panel indicator, and you can see it's got the little stupidly fine little brass weights to balance it. This is 1.8 f8 is 50mm. So it's an Elmo zoom lens. It doesn't actually say the f-stop across the exposure range it has. So here's the transport. Looks like it's largely held on by this crude flex PCB at this point. That should solve part of it. There's probably another screw under there somewhere that I'm just not seeing. Start peeling. Oh, no, it's not screws, it's wires. So this is all still caught on those wires right there. A couple more. So there's the actual film transport mechanism, and you can see this is interesting. The wire coming out of that motor is in fact coaxial. So presumably it was, that's to reduce noise. So you can also see there's, I think that's the record head for, the audio track. There's some little switches in here. Oh, that one like that. It's a bent spring switch. And there's the, let's see, how does this work? Okay, so that's presumably the lock. So if we push, I see. So when the cassette's engaged, it pushes this little cylinder up. Oops. And then that cylinder slides through there, and that's what actually engages the recording. So then you can see when that's there, the pinch roller would move inwards to push against the capstan, which I removed. Then this would hold the film. You can see there's a little pad down in there that would kind of come in and cramp the film against the record head, which is right there. So this is just all one, just a mechanical assembly at this point. There's a few springs under there. You can see there's the Tokyo Micro branded motor, made in Japan. The whole thing's made in Japan. And there's just that really intriguing switch. Anyways, so the thing I want to see is in here. I want to get to the point where I can actually look at the shutter. Dangling diodes and all sorts of crap. One more lead. So here's the meter assembly. I wonder if I can take that off as a unit, because that's just amazing. I don't really want to mungle with it if I can avoid it, because it's just such a beautiful piece of engineering. Just look at all of those. I mean, it takes no force to engage. And again, it's a moving coil dial meter. So this little pin here is the actual portion that's tied to the coils. I guess this is just kind of like a remnant. Maybe they actually bought an off-the-shelf meter. Oh no, that just engages with the stop, so there's little stops here and there. So there's the shutter motor. It's got more little, I think that's actually a pie filter. At least they had noise issues. You don't really bother with the pie filter unless you have to, because they're a pain in the posterior. So there's more lenses in here. Time to flip. That screw comes out. There's a couple screws. Oops, I think I just put my finger in it. So this is a retaining bolt. And so are these. Looks like it's kind of a wedding cake construction where they layer the segments on. I guess they could assemble them as separate units. And the real challenge is finding the screws that take it apart without kind of making a giant mess of everything. This should come loose in a second. Oh, whoops, it's got a few more screws right over here. And it is loose. Okay. So we can see there's the aperture. You can actually see here's the back end. So presumably one terminal is the case. It's interesting, you can note there's a little filter thing here. I wonder what that's for. That might poke into the, oh, I bet that pokes into the viewfinder. So then you can just see, so you have one terminal there, one terminal. Actually, I wonder. If I put this on ohms, I'm not sure how much current this wants or how much this meter puts out. I'm measuring ohms. Not very much, apparently. Alright, well that was interesting. I was wondering if I could use the ohm meters, just the voltage from measuring resistance to make the coil move, but apparently it takes a little more juice than that. Well, actually, hold on a second. Maybe I just connected wrong. Because here's the other contact. I wonder what the resistance of this coil is, actually. I am not getting a reading. Oops. Bad connection. It is 0.88K, so it is about a kilo ohm. So that's a 1K coil on that meter element. Just all of these little mechanical assemblies, it's just so amazingly intricate. Just the several levers and actually, how are the 2 meter? How do they move these two together? Where are they coupled? Because I can see the coupling for one. Oh, I see. There's a little pin in the center. Down under there, there's a little brass pin that ties their movements together. Well, I'm going to set that aside. I might be able to drive that from the external source. So here is the mechanism with the shutter, and here you can actually see how it's got a half moon shutter. So you can see. So exactly half of the time it was. So the film is advancing, film's not advancing, film is advancing, film's not advancing. Oh, that's interesting. So if you look down here, you can actually right there you see the guide sprocket, which is what actually advances the film. You can see it kind of retracts, moves down, retracts, swipes down. Excuse me, retracts, swipes downwards. So that actually, that's the film advance. And then you can also see they've got a tachometer on this motor because they need to very precisely control the speed. And over here you can see the mechanism, the reciprocating mechanism for that arm. And then here you have a little switch. Okay, so when this So that's interesting. Okay, that's intriguing. So there's this little solenoid engages a stop that stops it with the film shut. So I bet that's what that's for. Because if you're putting film in there, you don't want it to expose the first cell. So I think this pops down, like that, and then it can't advance. So this appears to be like a film stop to stop it with the shutter shut. Because again, they only have a tachometer. They don't have a like an encoder or anything, so they don't know absolute position. So they need the reference, which I believe is that. So there's just a little electrical little button in there. So another thing you can see over here is that these all rotate all of that stuff, and in fact I bet, yeah, so the shutter actually drives the film take up. And then this whole mechanism presumably drives a little dial indicator that tells you how much film you have left through this long several stages of worm gears. Other thing that's interesting is, like, look here, there's these two little contacts which are riding on a interrupted brass plate. So it looks like that's some sort of mechanism to enable them to determine where in the, like, it produces 1 pulse per rev. So I think that enables them to monitor the like to get an electronic pulse per rev out of the shutter. Actually, let me stick a little bit of power in here and see what I get. Long enough. I need some longer banana leads. Oh wait, there we go. Put an extension on. They make banana extensions, I bet they do, but I don't know what they're called. Let's turn the voltage down. So, one goes on there, one goes on there. Oops. So there's the shutter running. Kind of makes some gas-like noises. So I wonder if the meter has a Hertz node measuring mode. I think I need to bias it. But it's interesting, you can see they've got all of these switches in here. And like, look at this little switch here that bobbles at a reduced rate of whatever that in there. You can see the film advance lever. I can certainly feel it. Yeah. So when this solenoid engages, that stops dead. I wonder what the voltage is. So let me, we've got this tachometer. You probably have to load it, but I'll probably put out something if it's unloaded. Of course. It's 47 millivolts, not much. Anyways, there you can see the shutter. rotating around. So there's with a better. See if I can get some peak frequencies. So you can see it being against the camera frame rate. Sure runs pretty fast. I'm probably abusing it horribly. It's supposed to run on what, 6 volts, and I just put I think 48 on it. Not 40 volts yet. Too bad you need a bias voltage for the frequency meter. Anyways, that seems to be about it for the contents here. I don't think there's much else in here that's really of interest. There's just nothing under there except for the circuit board. Interesting parts. It's a big TO220 device with no heat sinking. Nicely done. There's the drive wheel for the film take-up. Some funky little shafts. And one of these things in here. There it is. So this, reset it. And you just have the actual shutter mechanism. Oh, there you go. There's a, well, it's rather in pieces now, but there's a funky old Super-8 video camera. Well, an unusual one that supports audio. And here's the whole optical viewfinder assembly. Actually, now that I think about it, I kind of want to see what's inside of here. I mean, I'll just take the optical viewfinder off. Yep. Because I'm probably going to try and mount. I have a C-mount adapter for one of my cameras, and I'm probably going to see if I can bodge this onto that. You got a tiny image circle, but I think it's usable. No, there wasn't much under there of interest after all. Never mind. So here is the a split prism assembly. Oh, that's really interesting. So I noticed this corner chopped out there. I mean, see, there's like that black corner, and I think that has a little. This is a prism, and I think that went off to a meter. You see, it went off here, and then I think there was some sort of metering assembly in there. So I would bet that that's how it determines the overall illuminance. So then in there you have your split prism, and then that would reflect down here. So if you look in here, you can see what's over. Kind of see that way, but you can barely make out the circle of the over here. So it looks like it's probably like 20% or something this way, and the rest of it straight through. And then there's the optical viewfinder, and then this mirror would sit on it. And then you could see out of this side. It's quite the elaborate assembly, really. A little overbuilt, maybe. I mean, beautifully engineered, but a little excessive. And here's the actual lens. It's kind of coming apart a little bit, by the feel of it. So this is the actual mounting flange back here. I might just punch this all out, because I mean, if we take a look, I mean, one of the things you can do if you want to figure out focal distance is you point out a couple light sources, and then you just focus until you get, see, so I have a 5 LED light up there. So you can see I'm seeing the sections of the 5 lights. So that's zoomed out now. I seem to be zooming rather than focusing. I think this is not the entire lens now that I think about it. Yeah, I can just see straight through. So it looks like I have a 1x monocle. But it looks like it needs like an additional focal element in the back to be useful. Alright, well here we go, more playing with various bits. So here's the shutter. I'm running it off my power supply. It's a little bit twitchy. I'm not too sure why. But there you can kind of see. Oh. I think there's a bad connection in there internally. It takes a fair amount of voltage to make it move.